So this morning we are very pleased to have Jim OConnell before he heads out to a national conference where he's going to pick out next year's shows. But right now, Jim, who has been the executive director of the Grand Theater and Performing Arts Foundation since 1992, will tell us about some of that mix of things that he uses when he's choosing shows for us. The artistic judgment, the historical analysis, financial projections, calendar management, strategic alliances, trend spotting, risk-taking, bargain shopping, and every so often going for the gold as he books with your taste and not to it. Jim OConnell.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, everyone. I noticed as I was sitting here that the machine prompt on the stage or on the screen in the lower right, on the lower left, did any of you notice? It said freeze. We'll try not to do that while we're talking this morning. It is a pleasure for me to be here, and I trust that someone will let me know when we get close to 10 o'clock. I will try to leave some time between now and then for questions and comments that you have. But first of all, I'm going to give you what I have come to call a course in Programming 101. So this is called Presenting the Performing Arts, and I am delighted to have had the opportunity to share it with you this morning. And I did wish Ann Speckard Godspeed on her travels. It was a little easier for me this morning. Let's start with what is a presenter. There are a number of roles that take place in the performing arts business, and these are a few of them. There is, of course, the artist, who is the creator of the work that you see on stage. There is the angel or the patron or the funder, who the Medici, if you will, who allows the event to happen, who provides the financial support for the event to happen. An investor is another way for that, another term for that role in the arts facility. The producer is the organizer of what the event is going to be. The producer brings together the various artists that are necessary: scenic artists, sound designers, lighting designers, directors, and then finally performers to create for you an integrated performing arts event. Then there is an agent. The agent is the distributor or the wholesaler. The agent is the person who represents the production to somebody like me. And this week, as Vicki mentioned, tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I'll fly to New York, and I will spend until next Tuesday meeting with agents and managers who are representing artists and performing arts productions that they want to put on tour a year from now, or a year from September, actually, so that to see whether they can visit us here in Wausau at the Grand Theater. A presenter is the programmer or the promoter, or, if you will, the retailer. Essentially, what I do is I buy stuff off the racks at a trade show, and then I bring that here and put it on the rack and try to sell it to you. That's my job. I'm a retailer. The interesting thing about retail in the context of the Grand is that, just like in other retail businesses, there are specialty stores and there are general stores. Specialty stores, a boutique program would be a chamber music series, for example, or a dance series. There are people who bring only a certain a certain genre of the performing arts and specialize in presenting that. That generally happens in larger communities. What happens here in Wausau, where we don't have a lot of indigenous professional companies, we've got some great local amateur companies, but we don't have a lot of professional companies that are in our area putting on their own work. So I get an opportunity to be more of a generalist than some of my other colleagues. And what we have is a grocery store or a department store. And what I try to do during the course of a performance season is choose a little bit of theater and a little bit of dance and a little bit of chamber music and a little bit of jazz and a whole bunch of stuff that I really hope will sell, and and some Broadway too, because Broadway is in the performing arts business kind of the gateway through which many people become involved in the performing arts. So we concentrate hard on the touring Broadway product that comes through. The other thing about touring Broadway, and the reason that it is probably the element that we have to schedule first, is because Broadway shows travel in trucks. As a matter of fact, as many of you have probably heard me say in other circumstances, you measure the size of a touring show by the number of trucks it takes to carry it across the country. Broadway shows like to travel so that they can perform every night. That means that if load out, that is the end of a show, and the ability to take down a show and put it back on the truck so it can get back on the road. If that starts at 11 o'clock at night, and in order to get the show up, you have to start loading it in, that is, taking it off the truck and putting it in the next theater at 8 o'clock the following morning, and it takes 3 hours for you to get it out, that means you've got from 1 o'clock until 7:30 to drive from one theater to the next. So that's the schedule of a theatrical tour is based on one night's trucking, and they try to schedule segments of actually 5 to 6 hours driving so that they can get 7 trucks, or I'm sorry, in our case, between 4 and 6 trucks, plus a crew bus, plus perhaps a cast bus, but the cast bus doesn't have to get there until 6 o'clock at night rather than 6 o'clock in the morning. But they try to segment those tours in 6 hours travel, in segments of 6 hours travel. So the routing for a theatrical show is very much more complex than it is for a 3-person chamber music group that can get on a plane in one morning and be 1,000 miles away 3 hours later. So we try to, because Broadway touring is important to us, we try to maintain as much flexibility as we can in scheduling those Broadway shows. And then we try to fill the other shows in around them so that we have the ideal mix of probably 3 shows a month for the 9-month performance series. That'd be about 27 shows, and then a few drop-ins along the way. That's the way we would ideally love to do a show. But any of you who've been part of the Grand Theater program for a number of years will know that there have been some weeks when we've had 3 shows in a week. And it drives you crazy. It drives me crazy, too. What has happened in those circumstances is that some show that travels by truck has suddenly had a change in its schedule. When I've got everything else lined up, I get a call from an agent who says, the producer just told me that their time in Chicago, or their time in Milwaukee, or their time in Minneapolis, one day's trucking away from us, has shifted. And instead of coming the third week in October, can we move you to the beginning of April? And I'll get this call generally 2 days after we have put the season brochure on the press. So those are the interesting parts about the retail business. Essentially, what we're doing is we're selling tomatoes. We're not selling cars. We're not selling something that I can put on sale up to the moment that if it doesn't sell, I can cut the price on it later. I'm selling something that if it doesn't sell, it's spoiled and it's gone. So the tomatoes have gone bad, even if you haven't thrown them at me on the stage. So it's an interesting business, and from that point of view, the fact that we sell goods that have an expiration date, I'm more in the grocery business than in the department store business. The facility manager, by the way, is the person who owns the building. As director of the Performing Arts Foundation, I am both the facility manager and the programmer, which is a fun part of the business to be in, and I'll explain that in a little while. Now, let's talk about performance contracts. Those of you who went to, who had a course in business law somewhere along the line will know that there are two elements to a contract, to a legal contract. There is performance, that is whatever it is you promise to do, and there is consideration, that is whatever it is somebody has said that they would give you in order to get you to do the thing that you promised to do. In our case, the performance is actually a performance. We have artists or companies that have promised to supply us with an event on a date at a particular time. Consideration is money. And what we pay the performer is based somewhat upon the cost of the touring production. As I mentioned, Broadway shows tour in trucks. We generally have between 4 and 6 trucks, generally two buses or 3 buses full of technicians and performers, although sometimes the technicians and performers fly, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the cost of that of a Broadway show is based upon the cost of getting it here to a large extent. And for the past, actually since I've been in Wausau, for the past 22 years, the cost of a touring Broadway show, that is the basic fee of a touring Broadway show, has only increased from about $25,000 to about $35,000. Now think what's happened to gasoline prices in the last 20 years, to lodging prices in the last 20 years, to food prices, because they have to pay these folks a per diem while they're on the road so that they can eat. And there are as many as 40 to 60 people on the road in a touring theatrical production. Those costs have increased significantly more than that proportion. So what has changed is, in a touring Broadway show, in a touring Broadway contract, I will pay a base fee, but if we do well on the show, we create a joint venture, if you will, in the presentation of the show. So after the base fee and after the cost of putting on the show, That is, hiring the additional 40 to 60 people who unpack the trucks and set up the show and run the show and then come back and take down the show and put it all back on the trucks. Those folks are all local stagehands. And in addition to paying all those folks and the cost of the theater for that night and the marketing for the show and the ushers and all of the other ancillary costs, in addition to providing a meal for the performers before they go on stage because they've been traveling all day. Once we have covered all of those costs, then whatever is left over, we split with the producer. That is a new element. It used to be that I would just pay a fee of $25,000. When I first got here, some of you may remember the show City of Angels, the first significant touring Broadway show that we had at the theater in my tenure. City of Angels cost me $25,000. I sent them. We wrote a check for $25,000 and kept all the rest of the money. Now I will write, tonight I will write a check for $32,000, and then in the middle of the show we will check all of our costs, and I will pay the producers of American Idiot any 60% of whatever is left over after all of the costs are concerned, plus the $32,000 fee that we're paying them. So that's how come ticket prices have increased over the last several years, is in order to have that, what they call the back end of the deal, that allows the producers of the show to cover the increased costs of getting the show around the country and getting it here to Wausau. The offer, counteroffer, and acceptance, the contracting process is fascinating. We all think of contracts as written documents, but actually what's in the written document is actually terms. It's a clarification of the agreement, but the agreement really comes at the point that somebody says yes, at the point that two people simultaneously say yes. That's a contract. The rest of it is clarification. The rest of it is terms. The rest of it is details. Sometimes the details are important. But when I say I want to present Green Day's American Idiot at the Grand Theater in Wausau, Wisconsin at 7:30 on Tuesday, the 7th of January, and the producer, Steve Gabriel, says, yes, that date works for me, and we shake hands on it, we have a deal. We have a contract. And each of us needs to work hard to make that contract happen. The American Idiot Tour was not laid out in those wonderful 200-mile segments that I mentioned earlier. The American Idiot Tour actually was in Pembroke, Ontario on Sunday. And they went to bed in Pembroke, Ontario Sunday night. They got the trucks on the road from Pembroke, Ontario yesterday about 11 o'clock in the morning, and they got to the Grand just about 7 o'clock this morning. The cast has flown from Pembroke, Ontario. Most of the cast has flown from Pembroke, Ontario. Some of them are still in Detroit. But they'll be here by 7:30 tonight, which is why I talked to Steve Gabriel, the producer, earlier this morning. So there are always interesting things happening in the touring performing arts business, as there are in any other business. Offer, counteroffer, and acceptance. If I say I started that conversation with Steve through his agent by saying I want to present Green Day's American Idiot. And they said, well, we can do this date. And I said, no, we can't do this date, but I can do this set of dates. And they said, well, maybe we can do that set of dates, but I can't tell you that right away. So we were going back and forth before we had a deal. We both knew that we wanted to have this show on the Grand Theater series, but the offer and counteroffer with regard to dates, with regard to costs, with regard to whatever other terms needed to be necessary, that's a process of negotiation, and the deal isn't done until you get the details settled. And that's the point at which we send the brochure to publication and then get the change the next day. Facility management is an interesting part of our job at the Grand Theater. Let's see what's going on there. Okay. There are a number of things that happen in our building, from wedding receptions to business meetings to touring performances from around the country and around the world, to performances that have been created by folks right here in town, many of your neighbors. And all of those activities are equally important to us, even though we only have money, risk money, riding on the touring productions. And the reason that they're all important to us is, as I say on the slide, if it's in your building, it's your show. You don't care whether the Grand Theater is presenting B.J. Thomas this Friday, or whether, which is actually the case, Rick Muzzy, who owns radio stations in Stevens Point, is actually presenting that show. All you know is that the show is at the Grand Theater. And if something goes wrong with that show, the Grand Theater is going to get the blame. So we want everything to go well so that we can take the credit for the show going well. And that's one of the important things that staff members at a theater need to understand, is that every show that goes on in your venue is your show. Every show that goes on in your venue impacts your reputation and your ability to use the theater into the future, either positively or negatively. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us to make certain that every event goes off as well as it possibly can. A building is an attraction, but a building is an attraction exactly once. Once you've been in the building, a performance building, you come back for what's happening. Unless you bring people in from out of town and want to show them the theater, which I'm sure some of you have done from time to time, you don't come back just to see the place. You come back for the experience that the place provides. And that's an important element to remember. I've been involved with several grand openings over the years, and there is always the notion around among people who invest time and excitement in bringing a performance facility into a community. There is the notion that the building itself will sell the shows, at least for the first year. The fact is that doesn't happen. The shows have to sell themselves once the building comes into place. The building can attract attention to the shows, but the shows are the reason that people come. The experiences are the reason you come to the theater. The building is an opportunity for the community and for the arts. It's an opportunity for the community to experience things that it has not experienced before. It's an opportunity for the local arts to be displayed in a way, to be put in a showcase that they have not had the opportunity to be seen in before. If you take an old picture and put it in a new frame, suddenly you have a new way of seeing that theater, that picture. The same thing happens for local performers and local performing organizations. If we put them on the Grand Theater stage, they will be looked at differently than they have been looked at before, and that is a good thing, because there is some extraordinary talent around here, as I'm sure many of you know, and as I know many of you exemplify. Buildings, however, have walls. And those walls are both physical and psychological barriers for people. Part of the reason why we present such a wide variety of events at the Grand Theater is that I need people to find a reason to come through the door for the first time. Those of you who love the Grand have a sense of the quality, have a sense of what happens there and the variety of what happens there. But many people who haven't been inside before have the sense that it is not for them. And one of the reasons that we keep trying to bring new kinds of activity to the theater, whether it's on the stage or whether it's parties or meetings or other kinds of activities, is to get people to come through that door for the first time and realize that the place is for them too. That's really a key element in the kind of performances and the kinds of activities that we try to put into the Grand. So that the walls are no longer a barrier between people and experiences that we know that they'll enjoy. Staffing versus scheduling, that's a theater activity. One of the, it's a dilemma always. As Vicki mentioned, here on the campus, they burn 2,000 gallons of oil a day to keep the facilities running. Whether the theater is open or closed, we still need to keep the pipes from freezing. We still need to be ready with the staff to do everything every day. What happens with a building is that a building eats money every day. And many artistic organizations have come up against that hard reality when they say, having said to themselves for years, if we only had a building, we could. But the problem is that the building itself becomes an imperative. The building itself requires you to do things to make money to support the building, and it takes money away from the other things that you might do, which is one reason why having the Grand Theater to be the home of many organizations that are based in the community makes more economic sense than to have each organization have its own specialized building. It's one of the ways in which we serve the community by allowing the organizations that are indigenous to our area only to pay for the Grand when they're using it and not to have to worry about it when they're not. That's one of the invisible benefits we provide the arts in the community. And the economic imperative is, of course, for the Grand Theater, we want to have no dark nights. The difficulty is, by a dark night, I mean we want to have activity going on every single day. Because we have to pay for the building whether it's being used or not. So if it has revenue generating, if every day has revenue generating potential, then that's that much less than we have to cover either through fundraising or through making a profit on other activities. The difficulty is that we also want each individual event to have an opportunity to gain the attention that it has in the community, gain the attention that it can among its potential audience so that people are willing to come out and see it. So as a presenter, I want to have as much space around each performance as possible. As a facility manager, I want to have as little space around each activity as possible. It is a dilemma that is inherent in the business, and I live it every day. What am I looking at when I go to New York to look at a variety of performances, a variety of shows? Forgive me, I'm checking my time. First of all, the quality of the show. I want every event to be a fine example of whatever it is. Now, it's difficult, it's impossible, quite frankly, for me to see every show that is coming to the Grand. For one thing, if I have seen a show on Broadway, that's not the production that's coming to the Grand. That show has been built into that theater to run for a period of weeks, months, or years, and what's going to happen when we come to the Grand is that production will have been reduced to between 4 and 6 trucks so that it can be carried around the country and set up in a period of 8 hours or less, 8 to 10 hours or less, and then put back in the truck in a period of 2 to 3 hours after the show is over. So what I will buy when I'm buying a touring Broadway show is the promise from a producer that they will produce something that is worth seeing on our stage, that is comparable to, although not exactly the same as, the show that you've seen built into a Broadway theater. Therefore, given that, there is only a handful of producers that I feel comfortable working with, whom I know, based upon their track record in the past, based upon their reputation, will provide a production that will satisfy the audience, that will make you feel as if you have the money you have invested in a ticket has been returned to you. So one of the ways in which I evaluate the quality of the show is by the producer who's putting it on the road. And as I say, there are about 5 quality Broadway producers, or 5 quality producers of touring Broadway product that we feel comfortable working with at the Grand. Fortunately, they're successful because they produce good quality programming. So generally these folks are the ones that have the titles, the ones that have the right to produce the title that we want to have on the road. So the producer and the company who are producing the show is one of the ways in which I ensure quality. There are opportunities, though, with solo artists and dance companies where I do get to see the company in action before I book the show. That's one of the reasons I'm going to New York now, is that there are, around this national conference that we have, there will be about 3,000 people like me who program buildings, and there will be about 3,000 artists and agents at this conference. And many of those artists and agents, 10%, 15% of those folks, will be showcasing, that is, putting on small pieces of performances, 10 minutes to an hour snippets of performances that will allow folks like me to get a feel for the artist, now some of these are in hotel ballrooms that are a third the size of this room. So the showcase won't necessarily tell me that the person can command a 1,200-seat theater like the Grand. But over the years, I've gotten used to expanding people's the experience of that smaller ballroom, and I've gotten pretty good at telling who can command a larger space. So showcases is one way in which I can directly understand the artist. The other is I get references from other presenters, from my colleagues around the state and around the country. We have a wonderful network. There are a lot of very, very smart people working in this business, and I've been fortunate to call a number of them friends for more than 40 years. When there are 2 to 3 dozen people in this business for whom or from whom I will take a recommendation as gospel. If they say this is a performer that's really worth your time and attention, then I'll take their word for that. And then there is simply the reputation of the performer, and that's more general, but also a way of assuring quality, which is one of the threshold issues. The other threshold issues are the size and the cost of the show. That is, will the show fit onto the Grand Theater stage? We can fit 4 to 6 trucks worth of shows, worth of performance equipment and scenery onto the Grand Theater stage. We cannot fit 12 to 20 trucks worth of theatrical equipment onto the Grand Theater stage. And 12 to 20 trucks are the kind of shows that generally play Appleton and Milwaukee and the Twin Cities. Those shows take approximately, instead of 8 hours to load in and set up, they take 18 to 36 hours to load in and set up. The cost of union stagehands the cost of 100 union stagehands working 36 hours is something that we cannot amortize over 1,200 seats for a single performance. The math doesn't work. And unfortunately, given the size of our market touches 17 counties, comprised, and in those 17 counties there are about 300,000 people. That's about half the size of market you need for a week-long touring Broadway run. You really need 1 million people, although some markets, like Appleton, which have some contiguous markets around them, are doing it with a population base of about 700 to 800,000 people. But it's difficult at that level. We simply can't handle the week-long tours right now, and the shows that are still traveling in 12 to 20 trucks are the popular ones that you'd love me to bring. Wicked, Jersey Boys. Those are the shows that are still making money in engagements of a week or longer. And until they stop making money in engagements of a week or longer, they will not trim down from 20 trucks to 6 trucks, and they will not start doing one-night stands. So the reason that we wind up getting shows after Appleton has had them instead of simultaneously with Appleton is that they are simply not, it is not financially or physically possible for us to get those productions into the Grand, both because of the size of the theater, but even more because of the cost of loading the show in, the cost of the physical production of the show. So one of the other threshold issue is the size and cost. Will it fit in the Grand, and can I recoup the cost by selling 1,200 tickets at a price people are willing to pay? That's the second threshold issue after quality. And then finally, the saleability of the show. And this is where it's become more and more difficult for me to make a judgment. Something happened in the late fall of 2008 and winter of 2009. Perhaps some of you remember it. It was called the recession. And what happened during that time period is that people got scared. There were people who were certainly directly affected and had their incomes significantly impacted by the recession. But the general population, even people whose financial status was not touched by the recession, got scared. And a huge majority of our market and markets all over the country changed their habits. People changed their habits. I don't know about you, but I stopped carrying so much credit card debt. Started paying things off more promptly. Other people cut things out of their lives. Started coming to the Grand once rather than 7 times a year. There used to be a huge market for repeat shows. Some of you may recall that 20 years ago, we used to bring the touring production of A Christmas Carol every other year. What has happened in that time period and what's happened especially since the recession is that people will look at a ticket price and rather than say, oh, I loved that, I want to see it again, they will say, oh, I loved that, but I've already seen it. So it's become more difficult for me and for my colleagues around the country to predict what shows are going to sell. Because people want to buy things, they want to buy experiences that they know will be great. So they are less likely to spend money on something they haven't heard of. They're less likely to take a chance with me. But they are also less likely to spend money on something they have already seen. So it's become really an interesting process to try and put together a season, and I can't say that I've gotten the formula down yet. Quite frankly, because although people have broke their habits back in 2008, 2009, I don't think people have formed new habits yet. I think we're all a little bit leery of these repeated financial shocks and repeated financial threats that are touted to us so deliciously by the news media. Just like the fact that over the past 2 days, if you step outside your home, your eyeballs will shatter. The notion is that tomorrow, the stock market may crash and all of your savings will be dust. Therefore, you can spend nothing. We are still being told that even though by many objective measures, not all by any means, but by many objective measures, the economy has stabilized. The economy is getting better. But people have not formed new spending habits. So it's difficult for us to latch hold of those. For those of us in the performance business, those of us in the, how should I put this, in the discretionary expenditure business, to estimate what you're going to spend on a show next year or which shows you're going to be willing to spend on. So the saleability of the show has become a very interesting aspect of the criteria by which we put together a season. After that, these are the things that I try to balance during the course of a year. As I said before, we're in a market where there are not a whole lot of artistic choices that are based in this market. Therefore, I feel it's incumbent upon me in putting together a season to put together a wide array of art forms, to put together a little bit of everything so that you can have a smorgasbord from which to choose something that is to your taste. And if you see something on the season that you're sure you don't want, trust me, I didn't book it for you. I booked it for somebody else. And I sure hope that person finds it. The age range of the show. We try to book shows that will have an appeal to a wide variety of age ranges. Now, I've been in this business for more than 45 years. And when I came into this business, there was a very influential paper that had been put out by the American Symphony Orchestra League. A very unfortunate acronym, by the way. But they have changed their name to the League of American Orchestras. That's how bad an acronym it was. But the American Symphony Orchestra League put out a white paper that expressed the serious conviction that they wondered where their audiences were coming from in the future. And it was called The Graying of the Audience. What I have learned over the last 45 years is that performance attendance is a life stage-based phenomenon. What I mean by that is when you are between the ages of 16 and 26, you attend a lot of performances because you can. Sometime around the age of 26, until around the age of 50, you stop attending as many performances because you can't. Because you have two time and attention sucks. One of them is called career, and the other is called family. And then, at somewhere around the age of 50, you find that you have a little bit more time, and with luck, you've got a little bit more money, and you say, hey, I used to like going to the theater. Why don't we try that again? And so you come back somewhere around the age of 50. And this will always be true. Boards of directors, national conferences, and national organizations are constantly asking themselves and their members, how can we get more 30-year-olds into the theater? The answer is, you can't. We can get them in on occasion, but we're never going to have an audience that is majority. The majority of the audience will never be 30 to 45-year-olds. The majority of the audience in a performing arts center will always be between 50 and 70 years old. It will always be between 50 and 70 years old. Our job with regard to the 30 to 45-year-olds is to present enough activity that appeals to them that we remind them periodically how much fun they had at the theater when they were younger, so that when they get older, they'll come back. What I am trying to say to you and to all of my colleagues in the industry is that gray heads are a renewable resource. And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. The ticket price is also one of the major elements that we try to do. One of the reasons that we don't present only events that you have heard of is because the law of supply and demand tells us that if there is only one celebrity name, that person's price is going to be astronomically high. Bill Cosby could work as much as he wants. He used to want to work less. And so they simply set a threshold. If you want Bill Cosby to come, the artist fee is $100,000. And when we brought him for the opening of the reopening of the Grand, the opening of Arts Block in 2002, Bill Cosby's artist fee was $100,000. Not because Bill Cosby's cost was $100,000, but because Bill Cosby really didn't want to work that much. Or he wanted to work on other things that didn't require him to travel more. But it was a way of saying, who's serious? Who really is willing and prepared to present this artist in a particular way? Now, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, Bill Cosby decided he wanted to work more. He changed agencies, he changed managers, and he reduced his price to $50,000. And that's why we brought him back a year ago, in May, because his price was down and he was willing to he was willing to work. I knew that the first time we brought him, we could sell 2 shows, and that was for Bill Cosby to come to your town. It cost $100,000, but he'd performed twice of an evening. Now it's $50,000, and if you want the second show, it'll cost you more. But I knew that we could bring in enough people to pay for that $50,000 price when we brought him back, and that's why he came back. So the ticket price is important because we can't go up too much higher. Part of the reason that we try to bring in some non-celebrity activity, first of all, is for the art form-based variety that we're trying to present. But another aspect of it is quite simply, I don't want every ticket to be $80. I want to have some $30 and $20 tickets that we can provide to people and give them wonderful experiences. Now, in order to see a show that's $30 or $20, you have to take a chance with me. You have to, because you won't have heard of these folks. They're commanding prices that would require us to charge you $60, the folks you've heard of. The folks you haven't heard of are really, really good. And we'd like you to take a chance at a lower ticket price to have you come see them. And maybe then you can say you saw them when. And then, of course, there's the market segment. There are folks that love country. There are folks that love comedy. There are folks that love rock and roll. A lot of people love Broadway. But there are a whole bunch of market segments, and we try to hit as many of those as we possibly can during the course of a season. There's the purpose of the show. I mentioned before that Broadway is the gateway. Entertainment is the gateway to the performing arts. But entertainment is not the only aspect of the performing arts. There are historical and cultural reasons why the performing arts are important, and we try to honor those aspects of the arts as well with the program that we put together. So the traditional performing arts, music, theater, dance, we try to have some aspects of all of those over in a 3-year period. It's become more difficult, quite frankly, to present chamber music and dance because fewer people are coming out to those. Those are one of the areas in which we have not been able to bring back people to the theater in the past. But from the past, but we still try to bring those in on a regular basis, even though we don't bring them in every year. And then there is stretch. We try to do things. Every event has a life cycle. I mentioned the Christmas Carol event that we used to bring in 20 years ago. Every event has a life cycle. Every special event, every festival has a life cycle. The life cycle goes something like this. You start out with people having no knowledge of it, and then it generally gets into people's consciousness, and then it becomes popular. And then it plateaus, and it stays at that level for a period of time. Might be long, might be short. And then it starts to fall, and then it disappears. If we are not constantly renewing the program by bringing in different kinds of art forms, we are dooming the program to failure. We want to bring in different activities, different kinds of activities, to see what will be popular in the future. I can tell you that when I came here 20 years ago, the thought of bringing Celtic music and dance to a predominantly German and Scandinavian area of the country was deemed nuts. But we brought the chieftains in, and they were very popular. And we brought river dance in, and it was extraordinarily popular. And we cultivated Celtic music over a period of time, and it lasted for probably 15 years as a significant part of our program. But about 5 years ago, it started to fall off. And so I'm being judicious about Celtic music because its popularity has waned and its ability to attract audiences has waned. We haven't abandoned it altogether, but we're only bringing it in once a year or twice every 3 years instead of having it be a multiple part of the program. It's one of the interesting things about the program, but I keep stretching and trying to find something new. I wish bluegrass were that, because we've tested it a few times and there's some great bluegrass groups out there, but we haven't yet hit the touchstone for bluegrass. We keep trying different art forms in the hope that we will find another one that can elevate, become a significant part of the program, and last for a while. So stretching the taste and stretching the markets is one of the ways that we're working. So then finally there is the rhythm of the season. I need an attention-getting opener in late September or early October, because I need to remind you that it's time to come back indoors. Hey, remember us? You've been out in the sun too long. Come on back. So we need something big and attention-getting at the beginning of the season. And then we try, as I mentioned earlier, to have shows every week or 2 weeks, maybe 3 shows a month, but that always gets thwarted by touring and touring schedules. But we try to space the shows across the season. And then we try to have a sequence of balance and purpose. That is, I try not to do shows that appeal to a particular market segment. I try not to do shows that appeal to a particular age too close together. Try not to do shows that are of a single art form too close together, because we don't want to exhaust that audience. And then I need a crowd-pleasing closer so that when I remind you that it's time to come back in the fall, your last memory will be good. Will be a good one. Hey, the theater's open again. I don't want you to say, oh, I hated that last thing that I saw there. I need a crowd-pleasing closer. Sometimes it works. Sometimes, as with West Side Story last year, it doesn't work as well as it should have. But there we go. And then we keep trying to choose events that are going to develop the program. We try to build on the history and the experience that we've had. We try to open new possibilities. We were doing some significant experimentation in the late summer with events in August and early September, just before the recession hit. We have stopped that because we don't have the venture capital at this point to do it. But in the future, we'll try and open up new portions of the calendar to performances. It's difficult in the summer because, as I know you know, that's outdoor season in Wisconsin, and it's tough to coax you inside. We try to develop new event types, and once again, as I said before, the events have life cycles, and so the mix has to be renewed regularly. And these are the art forms that I'll be looking at during the course of my time in New York, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to find things in most of those art forms that make sense for us to bring in for you next year. I think we've got about 4 minutes left for questions, and I'd be happy to entertain them. Interesting question. It is a possibility that Central Wisconsin Symphony could come back. They were an economical way of bringing symphonic symphonic music back to the series. I will say it's under consideration. We're in discussion. I'm not sure that their program next year has something that makes sense for them to bring, but in the future, I think it's a distinct possibility.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, over here. Let me hand you the microphone so people can hear the question.
From the perspective of the contract, events that were certainly out of your control, speak to us about West Side Story.
All righty. For those of you who don't know, West Side Story was hit by a flu bug. The cast of West Side Story was hit by a flu bug as they arrived in Wausau. And quite frankly, of the 5 major characters, only one was capable of leaving his or her hotel room. And 2 of the understudies, for those that couldn't, were also incapable of leaving their rooms. I mean, this is virtually an unprecedented situation. So what we decided to do, now I learned about this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a 7:30 show. So what I didn't want to do was send a full house away. We decided to do what we called a concert production, which is all the singing, all the dialogue, but the singing and dialogue were not done by the folks who were rehearsed to do it. They were done by other company members, for the most part. And none of the dancing, or very little of the dancing, and none of the scenery. We decided just in a very quick phone call on a 25% refund to the audience members. It turned out that 25% was not nearly enough to compensate you for the nature of the change in the show that you expected. And I had considerable conversations with a number of folks over the course of time. And what we did was we refunded everybody 50% of their ticket price, and we gave each audience member another 3 20% off coupons to use for another show in this coming season. In terms of the contract, our relationship with the producer is a good one. Essentially, we deducted all of the costs after the refunds, although they did not participate in the 20% off coupons going into the future. That's entirely on the grant. But we reduced the revenue by the amount of the refunds, and then rather than my paying them the $35,000 that I was contracted to pay them, I just paid them half of what the net was after all of our costs, and it worked out. It was not ideal for either of us. They lost a little bit of money. We lost some credibility, and we lost the revenue that we would otherwise have made on the shows that you're taking the discounts on. But it was an equitable working out of a difficult situation with somebody we want to work with again, because it's a very good producer. It just, these things happen.
Let me take one more question. John?
Broadway and
John?
theater.
Use the microphone.
Can you tell me the difference up there between Broadway and theater?
Broadway is, in the context in which I consider it, Broadway is musical theater that has high visibility, high popularity. Theater is generally spoken word theater that is not musicals, generally straight plays, usually more classical or historical in their context, and not as current in terms of their the recent production. Like Virginia Woolf, yes, exactly. Thank you for mentioning that.
A great production that was here at UWMC Theater that Jim was in, which is the reference there. We want to thank Jim very much for his insight that he has given us today. Let's give a round of applause to Jim for the work that he does.